In this lesson, we are going to go over the necessary steps to prepare your project in Premiere to send over to DaVinci Resolve. The reason we're doing this is because, as you know, sometimes certain things in one piece of software do not translate over to another. For example, if there's a filter or effect that only exists in Premiere, well, if we send that over to DaVinci Resolve, Resolve won't know what to do with it, so it might connect to the wrong clip. It might not show that clip at all. It might do all kinds of crazy things. So the best thing to do to keep your entire workflow much more efficient and trouble-free is to follow these steps. So let's get started. So the first thing that we want to do before we do anything is to not mess up your picture lock sequence. So here's my picture lock sequence. It's a short, typical, 35-second sequence. So I'm going to go over here and right click in the browser, and we're going to duplicate this. And then what I typically like to do is to just, let's name this for Resolve at the end. Okay, and so now if we open it up, we have our for Resolve sequence. And then we want to click on our original picture lock. And before we do any of the kind of cleaning things up, organizing and preparing for Resolve, we want to export a reference movie of our picture lock with all of our effects, with all of our titles, with everything else, speed adjustments, crops, reframes, etc. We want to export that for Resolve. So we can simply just click on our sequence, go to File, Export Media, or you can see the keyboard shortcut is Command E. And now for this is just for reference. And what that means is that what you'll see in a lesson coming up is that you can literally, Resolve has this really cool function where you can literally put your reference movie and your timeline right next to each other so that you can compare the two, and you can make sure that the entire sequence that you bring into Resolve came in correctly, that everything looks as it should, that the right clips were linked up, and that's what we're sending this reference movie out for. So again, we can just typically do an H.264. It doesn't have to be the highest quality because it's just for reference. And you can do a preset, something like high bit rate. And then the other thing I would do is do the time code overlay. And that's just helpful so that you can see exactly what frame every shot is landing on. Okay, and this sequence doesn't have any sound, but typically, again, AAC, whatever the standard quality is, will work just fine. Okay, and then we will go in here and we will rename that. I always like to do _ref. Save that. Okay, and then basically that's it. And then we can export this. Okay, so now that is done, and we can now close our picture lock. And now we go into the steps of cleaning up our sequence here. And the reason we do this is honestly because this is, a pretty typical sequence with titles, and we have things on tracks 2 and 3. But depending on the kind of editor you are, you might be super organized and neat and have everything on one track and it's color coded and looks amazing. Or you might be the type of editor who, has a ton of things on the sequence. You have alternate takes, you have, 10 or 15 video tracks. Some tracks are on, some are off. You have a ton of stuff going on. And even though you might know exactly what's going on, DaVinci Resolve will not. So what you want to do is simplify your sequence, clean things up, organize them so that when you get to Resolve, Resolve understands what's going on. You don't have any extra shots, excess clips, extra footage of any kind, or things that might make the entire process a lot more difficult and introduce a lot more headaches and technical difficulties. So that can be something as simple as, for example, let's watch through this here. I have a title. Okay. And then we have this guy here that pops in. We have a little bit of an effect there. And then we have a cross dissolve coming up. Okay. And we have this split screen. And again, it's just a short little project. And the end title, there we go. Okay, so let's get started here and I'll go through each shot. So the first thing that I see here is this title. Okay, so this is a graphic and a title that was created in Premiere. So, and using Premiere's title generator. So this will not translate over to Resolve. So stuff like this we would remove, and then after color, when we come back to Premiere, we will simply reapply those. And that goes for all these other effects as well. I know that might sound like a lot of work, but really that's part of why we're keeping our sequence organized, because really it's not that much work. And in most situations, it'll actually be a pretty quick process and it'll save you a ton of headaches by simply following along and cleaning up your sequence. So the first shot here, I happen to know that this is actually a clip that has a speed adjustment. So 50%. One thing to remember is that for very basic adjustments, for example, a speed adjustment of just a basic 50% adjustment or 75% adjustment or 90% adjustment, for example, that kind of stuff is typically fine. Resolve understands it. Where you do have to be careful is if you had, for example, a clip that might have been, speed ramped from maybe you were at 100% and you're speed ramping up to 200 and then back down to 50 and then to 12%, and you're keyframing all these different time remaps. That kind of thing, typically, if you do send it to Resolve, it won't understand. So you would have to either remove that or take that shot and bake or flatten that speed adjustment or effect into the shot, export it from Premiere, and then bring it back in and edit it back into your timeline. Again, I'll go over that in a second, but that's just kind of a quick overview of how we might handle certain effects or adjustments that Resolve doesn't understand and might be too much work to remove and then reapply later. Okay, so again, that's simple though. That's just a simple 50% adjustment. This is just a basic clip, no adjustments there. This is an example of the cleanup. We have two shots here. This one we're not even seeing. We are only seeing obviously the track up here. So if I were to say, turn that off, you can see this is an alternate take that I had. So I can actually just delete that. And then, okay, and then here I can just hold down Shift, bring this down, and I'm holding down Shift so that the clip doesn't shift left and right. By holding down Shift, it'll just kind of lock it and you can bring it straight down without slipping any frames or time to the left or to the right. So then I go through. You can see this one here actually was another shot where if I select it, I actually punched in 25%, but again, that's just a very simple constant adjustment. So that should be fine for Resolve. Had I been, again, doing a keyframe where I'm maybe doing a digital zoom, for example, that's something where I would probably have to remove that and then just reapply it when I'm back in Premiere after color. Here we go. This was just a kind of messing around temp color. You can see it's lumetric color filter, so that kind of stuff. Any sort of third-party filter or temp color you want to remove. Okay, so let's keep watching through. Same as before, we're not even seeing this shot. That's an extra clip that's not necessary, so Shift and drag that down. There we go, and we have a cross dissolve. Cross dissolves are fine. Any sort of basic transition like a cross dissolve, dip to color, fade ins, fade outs, that kind of transition is great. If you do have any sort of third party transitions where you maybe went out and purchased a package of like alpha transitions or really fancy transitions, that kind of stuff you typically have to turn off or bake that adjustment in. But this is basic, it's easy. And here's an example. We have a split screen. Here we have to have things on 2 tracks because we have one of the clips resized on the left and one resized on the right. So here's something where maybe I don't want to turn this off. I don't want to remove this. I don't want to have to rebuild this after the grade. So I'm going to just bake this in. So I can just select this, hit X, and I will take this, go to export. Okay, and in this situation, we don't want to lose quality. So I typically recommend doing a ProRes export. So in this case, I'll do, say, Apple ProRes 422 HQ, and then let's rename this shot here. Maybe I'll just rename this split screen. There we go. And again, I'm just kind of, everything else will stay the same, the resolution, and I'm just transcoding this to a ProRes 422 HQ so I don't lose any quality. There's no audio in this situation, so I don't have to worry about that. So I'll just turn that off. Okay, and then I will export this shot. And it's done there. And then we would go here, import. Here's my split screen shot, and here's what you can see that I meant by baking in the shot. I exported it at a high quality in ProRes so that this stays as I had it in my sequence and I don't have to turn things off. And then it's just as simple as taking these, deleting them, and now I'm going to edit this in. There we go. And I'll drop this down, and you can see that is what's meant by baking an effect in. Okay, and you can see that's, there we go. And same thing here. We don't see the bottom track. And you can see how neat my sequence is getting here. And we're almost done. And this is another shot here. I happen to know that for this one, I did a horizontal flip. So I'm just going to remove that. Easy to apply that later. And again, we're not seeing this portion of that shot, so shift, drag it down, and then this end title again, we won't see that in Resolve. There we go. And so you can see how clean and neat this sequence is now. And so that is probably the hardest part of setting this up. And again, just staying organized when you're editing is a big help. And so now when we send this sequence to Resolve, it'll be just one neat sequence where everything's on one track. Sometimes you do have situations where you might need something on the second or third, which is fine. But the point is to just clean everything up so that when it goes to Resolve, everything translates correctly and you don't spend any time troubleshooting or fixing things, and you can jump straight into the color, make the adjustments you need to make, and then come back to Premiere to finish your project. So again, that process is exporting a reference movie of your picture lock. Then you want to duplicate your sequence. Then you want to clean up your timeline, bring everything down that could be brought down to track 1 or 2. Either bake in your effects or remove them if they can be easily reapplied later. And now we want to export an XML. So File, Export, Final Cut Pro XML. Okay, and then we'll save that. There we go. And from time to time, you might get something that's like a translation report that scares people sometimes because it looks like an error message. All that is a list of things that may not translate over to Resolve. So it's a document, you can just open it up, look at it with the text editor, and it'll tell you things like this title will not translate over into the XML, or this effect will not translate over. So if you see that, don't freak out, it'll be fine. That's just giving you information if you want to see what won't translate. It actually can be helpful in certain situations. And so now you can see where we're at is we have a cleaned up timeline, we have a reference video, and we have an XML. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to take all of this media and the XML and the reference movie and set up our Resolve project for color grading. So I'll see you there.